for inviting me here and to contribute to this very interesting debate. Secondly, although my only name is there, I will present results that are a joint effort of our research team on sustainability transition management in our department. So credits go to all the researchers in the group. Having said that, I have a management background. So what I will try to do is to try to contribute, if possible, by introducing let's say, a more micro level perspective to the debate. Having said that, these are the three main questions that I will try to reflect on in my presentation. Which transition pathways are currently occurring in EU regions? How to accelerate the green transition? And finally, which are the socioeconomic externalities of different transition pathways? The results that I will show are based on a data set that we have developed through a EU-funded project. This data set collects and merges data from the EU ETS with the data from socioeconomic data from Eurostat, specifically data related to competencies, scientists and engineers, tertiary sectors, data related to investments in R&D rather than fixed capital formation, data relating to well-being in terms of industry employment and risk of poverty. But the key characteristic of this data set is that it clusters data accordingly to the four different NUTS levels used by Eurostat. So basically, we have a panel data clusters around four different scales, being NUT0 the country, being NUT3 the provinces, how we call that here in Italy. Most of the results, not all, but most of the results that I will show you today focus on NUTS2. So 279 regions across the 27 EU countries plus the UK. The years covered are from 2008 up to 2017. Okay. So having said that, first question, which sustainability transition pathways are currently occurring in the EU regions? So in this slide, you see the two axes. The horizontal one shows the variation in CO2 equivalence emissions in the proposed time frame, while the vertical axis shows the difference in industrial GVA, gross value added. As you can see, most of the regions, approximately 60% of them, fit into the so-called green growth scenario, where we have a decrease in emissions, CO2 equivalents, and a growth in terms of industrial GDP. We see two different clusters in this green growth scenario. A cluster that we call relative decoupling, where we have the absolute reduction in emissions are lower than the absolute increase in GVA, and an absolute decoupling scenario cluster where the emissions decrease faster than how the GVA increases. Yeah.
This is the growth in real value.
Yeah.
So the change, not only the growth in
real value. Yeah. Having said that, we also see there are three additional scenarios that are present there. That we have the black growth, we have 1/4 of European regions that are growing, but they are doing it polluting, so emitting higher emissions. We have a black degrowth scenario. Very few regions are in this scenario, but they are there. And then about 15% of the regions are degrowing in a green way. Okay. These are the regions mapped in the map. Overall, we have a decrease which is quite positive. Honestly, if we have to compare this with the decrease that we have Europe-wide with the IPCC suggestions, we are below the expectations. The two green clusters are related to the green growth, being the dark green, the absolute decoupling, and the other one, the relative decoupling. Second question, how to accelerate these transitions? 2 points. The first one, in this chart, in the left-hand side of the slide, you see the carbon intensity, the carbon emission intensity, accordingly to the different scales, the different NUTS that we analyzed. We have run the latent growth models by exploring whether the unit of analysis, the scale, matters in a way stimulating decarbonization. And what emerges from this analysis is that overall, the UETS, especially phase 3 of the UETS, was instrumental in triggering the reduction in carbon emission intensity across EU regions. However, the use of different scales identified more, let's say, critical areas or possible areas of intervention accordingly to the different countries. So, for example, we have Germany and Spain, where NACS1 are more effective for developing specific policies that target decarbonizations actions, while France, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, Greece, in these countries, we have NACS2 levels that are more effective. And finally, we have a bunch of countries like Italy, Poland, UK, Belgium, where the province matters. So the NACS3 level is more effective if we want to stimulate this transition. The second reflection that I have concerning how to accelerate green transition refers to the plants, the installations. If we go down, if we zoom in into the different installations of the database, in this chart here, we have installations, decarbonization performance between 2005 and 2017. In the gray area, you have those installations who made reductions that were below 20% in CO2 emissions. On the top row, you have manufacturing sector. In the bottom row, you have energy sectors. Considering the top 4 European economies, so France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, plus the UK. And the blue histograms, the blue area there, are those installations that are been decarbonizing for an extent which is a little higher than 1% or even more. So, in a nutshell, many installations have not started the decarbonization journey. Policies should take these differences, to consider these differences in order to avoid a full sense of collective progress, and also avoid the perpetuation of lock-ins effect. Talking about lock-ins, we tried to explore the so-called super polluters, so those installations that contribute the most to the emissions. Again, talking about these 4 European countries plus the UK, in the proposed, and actually here we have data for 2017. For manufacturing, we have about 2% of the installations that contribute to roughly 40% of the emissions, something slightly more. For the energy production sector, we have 2.6 of the installations that contribute for roughly 50% of the emissions. We know that it's an issue, but just to provide you some number, in Italy, we have 7 plants for the production of energy that contribute for roughly 40% of emissions. So maybe we could start thinking of, we're talking about the speed of transition. This will not resolve the problem of net zero, but maybe we could speed up the transition process. Finally, we have probably to ensure that this decarbonization of super polluters is put into place. At the same time, we have also to avoid negative social economic externalities. And going to this point here of socioeconomic externalities, the final slide, we explored the different Eurostat data in terms of competencies, investments, and well-being for the different transition scenarios. And if we just compare the 2 green growth scenarios, so the absolute decoupling, which is the dashed line blue, with the relative decoupling, which is the dashed line in green, you see that in terms of competencies, number of scientists and engineers, tertiary education, the absolute decoupling shows higher values than the relative decoupling. If we now turn to investments, I go back to your point, we basically see the same thing. There is the absolute decoupling, we have some topics related to investments, while in the relative decoupling, we have a greater push towards that. But the issue that we found here relates to the so-called well-being. So in terms of unemployment rates and risk of poverty. The absolute decoupling shows higher unemployment and at the same time a higher risk of poverty compared to the relative decoupling approach. We just started, we haven't published that yet, to take a deeper dive into some of these regions that are in the absolute decoupling scenario. And what we are seeing, talking to companies and exploring secondary data, that there are two means of transition. Some regions have relocated plans or decommissioned them. Other regions have switched towards service-oriented business models. So two different modes of transition. So just wrapping up, most EU regions are reducing CO2 emissions. We suggest they are in a pathway towards decarbonization. However, different transition pathways emerge. Different policies to accelerate the low carbon transition should probably focus on scales. So could we target policies accordingly to the different countries, and also maybe better take into consideration the super polluters, and also finally considering, as we said in this panel, the socioeconomic externalities of this transition. Okay, thank you very much.